Cheers, welcome, yokoso, to another Dogs and Demons vlog. The second one, in fact, since we've started this series. Thank you for watching the first one. By now, you know what to expect from this vlog, I think. So if you're interested in this material and a dissection of Japan and some of the things that plague it, problems and solutions and etc., concerns, then feel free to watch. If it's not your cup of tea, I understand. Hopefully I'll have another video up soon that will be. There you go. So I was going through chapter 1, which is entitled The Land, the Construction State, and it's 50 pages, guys. So it feels like it's too much for one vlog, so I kind of went to what I think is a natural stopping point, and even the first chapter is going to end up being 2 vlogs. So I just don't want this to be like a 30-minute video and be like a podcast. I don't know why, but that's just my feeling. So again, I'll try to keep it under 20, and we'll see how we go. Hello, I hope you're doing well. Today's a Monday. It's a holiday in Japan. I'm not at work today, so I figured I'd take some time. I was trying to take advantage of the sun coming in my double windows over here, and they've kind of gone behind a cloud or something now, so it uses, it's a little bit more light in this room. I'm wearing my Jaws t-shirt today, my favorite movie of all time. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to start with the quote that starts the chapter. And, it's a somewhat revealing quote, why he chose it, etc. I don't know how much it pertains to this chapter, at least the first part that I'm going to discuss today. But here's the quote. It's a Japanese person in, the early 1800s. Our country, as a special mark of favor from the heavenly gods, was begotten by them, and there is thus so immense a difference between Japan and all the other countries of the world as to defy comparison. Ours is a splendid and blessed country, the land of the gods beyond any doubt. And that man was Hirata Atsutane, and he died in 1843. So I don't know if he's famous. Please feel free to Google, look it up, let me know if he was a prime minister or something. I don't know who he was. But basically, this kind of idea that Japan is special, that there's a unique quality to Japanness, you will find still today, and it's good and it's bad. It's perfectly fine to have pride in your country. I'm proud to be an American. My parents were always, even though they lived in America for many years, were always proud to be British. There's nothing wrong with having pride in your country and love of your homeland, etc. Of course, these can become destructive, as they did for Japan in World War II, but you'll still find that. And I think that speaks a lot to the way Japan restricts, say, immigration, etc. There's this feeling that they want Japan to stay uniquely Japan, and they don't want to dilute it. By letting in a lot of foreigners to either introduce other forms of culture or to literally dilute, the Nihon blood by having, new babies that are half, and etc. So anyway, if you've lived here a while, do you feel like you've run into this attitude before, that Japan is very special? Definitely. You'll talk to people, especially if they've never been abroad, and they'll tell you, oh yeah, I mean, Japan, look, we have 4 seasons, and oh, well, in Japan we do, this or something. And they'll feel like it's special to Japan, like no other place does that or has that. And that's just, not ignorance in the blunt form of the word, but just a limited knowledge of what it's like in other countries. All right. So the point of this chapter is, it's called The Land, and it's about the fact that there's kind of a disconnect. There's a reverence for nature and for the land that's built into Japanese society. It's been there for a long, long time. It's at the core of Shintoism. The Shinto is the native religion of Japan. Buddhism was imported. Of course, Christianity, it barely is a blip. So you'll read stories about waterfalls and mountain streams and Mount Fuji and haiku and everything. Scrolls have been illustrated with the beauty of Japan. Like I said, the whole Four Seasons thing. So this idea that nature is very, very important to Japan and the Japanese people seems to be at a loggerhead with the current bureaucratic need to build and rein in nature and concrete over things and build dams and change the courses of rivers and put these tetrapods, and I'll get to these later, in the ocean to save the shore, etc. So, he basically, what Kerr is getting at in this chapter is you can compare Japan to the Japan of the past economically and banking and stuff. And, if the money goes up or down a little bit, what's that really an indication of? The worldwide economy, etc. It affects that, the rate of the yen versus the dollar. There's so many things that factor into that are sort of even out of Japan's control. But if you really want to look at what shape Japan is in, you should look at the land and compare the way Japan is treating the land now to the way it did, say, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. What is it like to be in Japan now versus back then? And Kerr is pretty hostile, and this is a big point for him in this book. He feels, he at one point says that Japan has become the world's ugliest country. Now, I don't think that's true. I happen to live in a very, very beautiful place. And when I used to live in Shimane, in Izumo, in Taisha, I was just surrounded by glorious nature and mountains and stuff. But I also live in one of the least densely populated areas of Japan and one of the most rural. So, I really don't know what it's like to live, say, like PJ in Osaka or Kevin in Kobe or Hiko Simon in Tokyo. Their Japan is much, much different than my Japan. So, he goes on to talk about rivers and dams, and this is a big focus in this chapter. For instance, there's a bureau, a lot of this chapter is devoted to bureaucracy, that has dammed or diverted all but 3 of the 113 major rivers in Japan. So every major river in Japan except for 3 has some kind of dam, or they've built concrete, sluices or something where the water gets, changed direction, etc. Sometime, to help farmers, sometimes to, guard against landslides. There's all kinds of reasons why these things get done. Some of them, as you'll see, are not even really that relevant. America in the 90s, when he was really researching and writing this book, was dismantling dams. There were environmentalist studies had come out that said, these dams actually hurt the ecosystem, etc. And Japan was building like 500 new dams in the same decade. So why do they do this? And he's going to get to that, is the addiction to construction. And that's a big focus of this chapter. But he talks a little bit about, the fact that from 1970 to 1995, young people fled the countryside for prosperous cities, and local agriculture collapsed. And that's very true when I used to live in Izumo and Shimane. All the kids, when they get to a certain age, they want to go live in Osaka or Kobe, Tokyo, Nagoya, even Hiroshima. They don't want to live in the backwater, a farming community of Shimane, and so, who's left? And it's just the old people that are trying to preserve the farming ways, and, the few people, I guess, that, stick around to support, local towns, etc. He talks about one village in particular that he has a vested interest in because he bought a home there. It was kind of called the Tibet of Japan. It was so kind of remote and rural. It was called Iya, Iya, and it was in Shikoku. and I say was, it still is, it still exists. The island of Shikoku is kind of the smaller island. There's Kyushu and Shikoku and Honshu and then Hokkaido. So it's the smallest of the four main islands of Japan. And the main thing is, he talks about, he uses this as an example of how people used to farm and there was local agriculture, and like his neighbor used to grow potatoes and, their own rice, and they would sell tobacco and things like that down at the market. And then construction money came in, and everybody started to get a job in the construction industry. And now his neighbor, Mrs. X, fills concrete, silos or, tubes or something all day. So, everyone works in construction, and, it's just taken over. And they can't get rid of it, because if they do, then everybody's out of work, and it talks about that. There's no chance for an environmental initiative to come along to try to change things or halt construction or say, look, this is actually going to damage this area. We want to keep it pristine. We don't want to build a road here. We don't want to, slab over this mountainside with concrete to protect a possible landslide. We don't want to dredge this wetland and throw out all the indigenous animals that have lived here for 50 years, just so you can, have some more farming land for your rice or your cattle. Because if they do that, then everybody in the town or whatever, that makes money from working in this industry, would be out of a job. And so there's no chance for that kind of initiative to take hold. Everyone's living is tied to construction. And it's true. And I mean, you even if you just drive around Japan like I do sometimes, and you look, and there'll be like a guy, they'll be repairing a pothole in the road, say, but there won't just be one guy, with a truck and a few cones out doing the work, and maybe one other guy in the truck, pouring the concrete or whatever. There'll also be like a guy at one end with a flag saying, hey, slow down, and a guy at the other end saying, hey, slow down, and, the two other guys watching what the other two guys are doing. And it's like 7 guys out there where they probably only need like 2, and it's just because they need these jobs. And so, they just give this money. I mean, they don't give it away, but I mean, they just you just look at it sometime and you're like, wow, why do they need so many people to like do this one small thing? And it's kind of crazy. And furthermore, in this village that he talks about, they didn't really need a lot of these things that they were building. They didn't need these dams or these roads, or whatever. I mean, so few people used some of the roads that they had already built that literally spider webs would grow across the road because no cars would go along. And yet they were building more roads because it's a situation where the local, ministry would get a budget, and they would get, just say $1 million. And if they didn't spend the $1 million, then they would get less the next year and less the next year. So they had to spend it. They had to hire 7 guys when they only needed 2 because they needed to spend the money. And they had to go out and build these roads that nobody needed because they had to spend the money. And there's a quote here on page 17. I don't know if you're following along. Planned spending on public works for the decade 1995 to 2005 will come to an astronomical 630 trillion yen, which is about $6.2 trillion, 3 to 4 times more than what the United States, with 20 times the land area and more than double the population, will spend on public construction in the same period. So it's just crazy how much they spend. Japan has become this huge social welfare state, where all these low-skilled workers are out there, paving roads and digging ditches and, wanding people along at a slow pace along the road, with their wands and signs that say slow down. Because it's all just getting channeled through the state, and that's not good. One of the big things he talks about in this chapter is tetrapods. So you wouldn't even know what these are until you come to Japan, and then you see them everywhere. They're all along the coast of Shimane, which is on the Sea of Japan coast. They're these like they look like. Did you ever play the game of jacks, where you have a ball and you have jacks in your hand and you throw the jacks and you bounce the ball and pick them up? So they're little like uh, four concrete legs, like one out the top and then three in like a tripod formation. So, and they're huge. I mean, they're huge and they're just solid concrete, and they weigh like 50 tons. And just making those is a huge business for some companies. And then they've decided that they have to put them, along the shore so the waves will crash against them and not crash against the beach. And then erosion won't happen as quickly. But now they've actually done studies where that's not true, that the tetrapods actually cause the erosion to go faster, etc., etc. And they're just ugly. And they take away the fun at the beach. You can't just swim straight out. There's these like lines of these tetrapods sometimes, and there's a narrow kind of sliver through the middle of them sometimes where you can get out. They kill any waves, so surfing, etc. They're just a blight, and I really doubt the environmental impact that they've had. Policies put in motion in the 50s and 60s are not revised. That's a big emphasis of this chapter. The needs of people in the 90s are different than they were, say, in the 50s. And yet things that were enacted in the 50s and 60s still just kind of trug along because of this bureaucratic inertia. 60%, according to Kerr, of the shoreline of Japan, all around Honshu, etc., is now encased in concrete. There's concrete, things to prevent, the cliffs falling off. There's concrete, these tetrapods, blah, 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 blah. And it's just ridiculous. There's just no reason that in, say, the past 50 years we've needed to do that to all these shorelines to protect them that much. If anything, the water level is rising, right, because of global warming, etc. So Japan is addicted to construction, and you will find it often here. And many projects you figure out don't really address any real need. They don't need to be building, this bridge, that goes over to this island where nobody goes. They don't need to be building this new, road here. They don't need to be building, you'll just see it. These new community centers and stuff for people, a town of like 5,000 people that's shrinking. By the year 2000, Kerr says that 9% of GDP, gross domestic product, was spent on public works, whereas about only 1% of GDP was spent on public works in America. And again, America's huge and Japan is small. And then he goes on to describe, all the normal stuff you would think of that's inherent when you talk about construction. The normal bid rigging, bribery of politicians and local officials to get certain bids, handouts to political parties to say, hey, we'll support you if you make sure we get this contract to build this dam or whatever. So all that kind of, behind-the-scenes corruption goes on here in Japan, too. And, sometimes people will get, caught for it, etc., and they'll make a big deal out of it, but it goes on a lot. And a big part of it is like, okay, this ministry is in charge of building this road. And so they'll give the contract to this company. Well, this company is run by all the guys that retired from this ministry when they get to be 60 or 65. And so now they've got a vested interest. And they need concrete to lay down on the road, and they'll get all the concrete from this other company, which, the one guy at the head of this other company owns. And it just, kind of stuff like that goes on all the time. Japan is not that big a country, and there aren't really open bidding on projects. And the problem that's affecting us now is they need to help the people in Tohoku who had the tsunami happen, and they need to build housing and build new schools, etc., etc. And what's happening is now we're going to have the Olympics in 2020. So all these guys are like, hey, well, we don't want to do this kind of low profit building to help these people that were devastated by the tsunami. We're going to go do this huge for-profit bidding and get these projects to build new stadiums and new whatever in Tokyo, and abandon what they're doing for the people that really need it. And that's the worry that's going to happen, because of that's the negative side of the Tokyo Olympics so far. Now, I'm not saying that's happened, but Hiko Simons talked about it. I mean, it is a real worry. So one person in the book figures that if you think about all the peripheral jobs related to construction, as well as construction itself, 1 in 5 people in Japan depend on construction for their livelihood. And the problem that Kerr points out is that these are people that might have gotten jobs in the software industry or advanced, biotech or technology industries, or even the service industry to help, the swelling ranks of old people in Japan. And instead, they're putting on hard hats and filling concrete legs of tetrapods as their job, and they just don't need to be doing it. So the last thing is, I'm going over 20 minutes, so we'll just wrap up here a little bit. There's this great thing about bureaucratic inertia on page 22. Bureaucracy by nature tends toward inertia. For left to themselves, bureaucrats will continue to do next year what they did this year. In Japan, where ministries rule with almost no supervision or control by the public, bureaucratic inertia is an irresistible force. The world of policy functions like a machine that nobody knows how to stop, as if it had only an on button but no off button. So they're saying, and he gives specific examples of we're going to do this to this wetlands area, okay, and then 10 years later, they realize that it's actually going to be bad, but they've already taken so much money to pay it back or to stop the project or whatever would be disastrous for the local economy, so they have to go forward with it because there's just no other way to do it, and they have to spend this money. And a good example of that, and the last thing I'll talk about, is this dialogue on page 22 and 23 about why they have to maintain these budgets. You mean that once something is provided for in the budget, you can't stop doing it? One government person asks. Why not? The official responds, in the government offices, as long as a certain amount of money has been budgeted for a certain purpose, it has to be used up. Surely it wouldn't matter if there was a little left over. It's not that easy. Returning unused money is taboo. Why is that? Leftover money gives the finance ministry the impression that the project in question is not very important, which makes it a target of budget cuts the following year. The loss of even a single project means a smaller budget for the whole department. The director is going to take a dim view of that, since it affects his career prospects. So basically, it's you'll even see it as an ALT. They get money in to spend on education. They want to spend all of it. You'll sometimes get asked by your BOE, hey, do you need anything for your house? Do you need a new kotatsu? Do you need a new bicycle? Because they might have a little bit of extra money in the budget that year and they want to spend it. And they'll own that thing, and you'll have to give it back when you leave Japan, but they'll buy it. 1 year in Taisha, when I was there, Izumo absorbed the city of Taisha, and Taisha has this enormous shrine in it that's got all this kind of tax revenue and stuff. So all of a sudden, Izumo had all this money. So we went from having one ALT for 3 junior high schools and 1 ALT for 3 junior high schools, and then another guy out here and then me out here, to having one ALT for every junior high school. And we hired 5 new ALTs that year. And it was fun to have all those ALTs in Izumo, but some of them were at junior high schools that had 100 kids. There's just no reason they need to be there 5 days a week, and a couple of them got bored and left after a year. So it does affect you guys sometimes too. All right, so that's it. The next part of the book, the chapter goes into the post-industrial life and the pave and build mentality in Japan. So I'm going to leave it there, get this in under 25 minutes. But thanks for watching another installment. I'll be back with another one probably in about a week. But sumo starts next Sunday, so I'll also be distracted by that. Peace. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.